Okay. Yeah.
She got it. And when it was before, you're about to.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. I'm Ron Strobel, the Sergeant at Arms. Our invocation this morning is by Jim Ahern.
Thanks, Ron. Good morning. Please bow your heads. As we gather here today as members of Rotary, we pray that we are ever mindful of opportunities to render our service to fellow citizens and to our community. Keeping in mind always the enduring values of life, exerting our efforts in those areas and on those things upon which future generations can build with confidence. Let us continue to strive to make a better world. Specifically, for this month of meetings, help us have fun, yet productive sessions that'll broaden our perspectives. Amen.
Thank you, Jim. And now our pledge and four-way test will be led by our newest Rotarian, Mandy Conley.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, the four-way test. 1, is it the truth? 2, is it fair to all concerned? 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Well done, Mandy. Thank you. Do we have any guests, Chris? Okay. And now our president, Father Joe Boisel.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests. Good to see everybody here today. A few announcements I have. The first one is, since she's already real close here, I'm going to bring Mandy back up here. As I typically do, I forgot last week when we inducted her as a newest member to give her an opportunity to introduce herself. So I asked her to give a couple, 3 minutes and tell us about yourself.
I don't know if it'll be 2 or 3 minutes. My name is Mandy Conley. I just moved to Hudson in June from Columbus. I'm an attorney here at Krugliak, Wilkins, Griffiths, and Dougherty. We just opened our office in Hudson last year, I believe. I'm a labor and employment attorney. For undergrad, I went to Ohio State. For law school, I went to Akron. So I lived in Canton for 3 years after law school, moved back to Columbus for 2 years, met my fiance, Matt. He's from Solon, so then we decided to move back to Northeast Ohio. And so that's where we live now in Hudson with our 2 dogs, John and George. I'd be willing to give anybody George if you want a chocolate lab. He's very bad. So other than that, I'm really enjoying being in Rotary. This has been great, and I really appreciate everybody welcoming me in.
I'm going to bring up Ed Sogan now, and he has a bit to say about Santa on the Green.
Sir.
You're welcome.
I got a call yesterday from Santa from the North Pole indicating that he is ready to go. Santa on the Green has been a fixture in Hudson for over 50 years. We will be hosting it. The Rotary has taken it over for the last 20, 25 years. So we'll be hosting it on December 3rd. The event goes from 9 until 3 p.m. Our volunteer elves are on 1.5-hour shifts. Santa and Mrs. Claus will be arriving by fire truck as usual at 9 o'clock. So we're looking forward to that event. And it's never too early to look at that date, December 3rd. Mark it on your calendar, and we'll have a sign-up sheet as we get into November. Thank you.
Rumor was that Santa had, broke his shoulder, like in a sledding accident. I think that, but he's good though to go now, right? Yeah. All right. Let's see. What else do we have? We have next week, the 14th will be a board meeting. And so members of the board plan to be around for that. Stay after. Anybody is welcome to be part of it as well. Our service project for the month of September, is it called NAMI? Where's Terry? Is she around here? Yeah. Is that? Okay. Okay, and it's a homecoming program, so there's a sort of packages to put together for, okay, right. I had to leave early that day, so I think I missed out on the last part of that. So bath towels, toilet cleaners, dustpans, brooms, trash bags, that sort of thing. So yeah. Okay, great. So yeah, people with mental health needs who are going to be set up in their own sort of living space, and this helps them to get going. So if you want to be part of that, the list is on the newsletter sent out by Maryland, so you should be able to find it. If you don't know, send me or somebody else an email, and we'll figure it out. But those sorts of things to gather together. I think that's all. Any other announcements? If not, I'll invite David Basil to come up and introduce our guest today.
Thank you, President Joe. Good morning, fellow Rotarians and guests. This month is Government Month. The theme for our speakers is government, and we are going to kick things off with a look at the candidates for Ohio House Seat District 34. The candidates are Beth Bigham and Casey Weinstein. Mrs. Bigham regrets that she is unable to attend, sends her regrets and appreciation for the invitation, saying that she is booked solid through Election Day, meeting with undecided voters. But we do have Mr. Weinstein with us, and we certainly appreciate his attendance. Casey was elected as the state representative for Ohio's 37th House District. Because of redistricting, it is now the 34th House District in 2018. He is the ranking member on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and also serves on the Armed Services and Veterans Affairs and the Higher Education and Career Readiness Committees. Casey is a 2004 graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and served on active duty as Deputy Chief of Information Assurance at Space and Missile Systems Center in Los Angeles, and as officer in charge of maintenance support at Wright-Patterson in Dayton. Casey received an MBA from The Ohio State University, Fisher College of Business in 2007. He was a member of the Leadership Hudson class of 2014. He is a resident of Hudson and led the class's successful project to fund and implement the Solar Training and Education Center at Barlow Community Center. And it is an amazing facility if you have ever visited. If you have not, I would encourage you to do so. He served as a Hudson City Councilman, Ward 2, from 2016 until 2019. Casey is married to his Air Force Academy classmate, Amanda. She is an economics professor at the University of Akron. They have 2 young daughters, Nora and Amelia, and a son, Brady. And by the way, Brady has much cooler neckties than his dad. Please join me in giving a Rotary welcome to State Representative Casey Weinstein.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave, Mayor. You have that honorific for me forever. Thank you all so much for being here this morning. I'm very cognizant, and I was warned that these seats are very comfortable, and if I don't bring it, you might doze off, right? So, this is an amazing facility. This is fantastic. This was in the planning stages when I was the Ward 2 council member, and now to see it come to fruition and be a host of such great community events is fantastic. So can I move? Can I roam? Okay. Well, so Dave mentioned that, I started my time in public office on city council, and it's wonderful to see so many of my friends who I made while serving on council here today. But the reason that I ran and I came and spoke to these topics to this group in 2018 was, to help things at the state level that could have a bigger impact on city council. And I put those into 3 buckets. And as I was thinking about what to talk about today, I was thinking, well, I'm 2 terms in, I'm running for a 3rd term. I should talk about what I pledged to do and how we've done to those ends. So we put these things in 3 buckets. The first was investing in our communities. And when I was on council, I came on at a time when there was disinvestment in our local governments. The estate tax and really critically, the local government fund had been reduced almost to 0. And I saw the impact working with Bill and others on council and Dave as mayor of that. It had a huge impact on Hudson's budget and on the surrounding communities as well. And I saw how important it was to have a great partner in the state to empower local communities to invest in their infrastructure, in their roads, and their trails, and all the great amenities that make communities great, that have made Hudson great over the years and have made it the city that it is today. These historic investments and the underpinnings that we build into a city to make it strong. So down in Columbus, I've had an opportunity now to vote and work on 2 bipartisan budgets, which have restored local government funding and provided actually this GA, an historic increase in local government funding through state funds and federal funds that we put into local communities. And it's giving the cities across my district the opportunity to make those big time investments that we need to make. Another project that I've really been happy to work on, and now as ranking member on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, this General Assembly, I was able to take a significant role in, was the H2 Ohio program. And I think you all know, you've heard me over the years, environmental issues are very important to me. And clean water is as foundational an issue, I think, as we can possibly provide to our constituents. And on council, one of the things that I learned most about being a city councilman is where water goes is incredibly important. Drinking, flooding, retention, the infrastructure, and we've seen how that can go wrong, and create tragic implications here in Hudson. So we had to make those investments in our water infrastructure, and together with the governor, we passed and reinstated the H2 Ohio program, which is an $880 million investment in the Lake Erie watershed, which part of Hudson is in. Most of Twinsburg is in, Macedonia, which is part of the 37th House District. So this is, we are in the watershed, hugely important source of economic, drives economic growth, and it's the water that we drink. And it's truly foundational to healthy communities. So we continued that program. There was an effort to strip the funding out completely. We retained it. So I'm really proud of that program as well. And then finally, in our first responders, going back to wearing my council hat, the government that you see locally is about 80% of the government that you ever interact with. We're talking those roads, we're talking water, we're talking first responders. Most of government in action is local. And so that is the bias that I've had
to the best of my ability on council, in the legislature. So we provided a dramatic increase in funding for police and fire. We helped shore up pensions for them. We provided expanded coverage for them as well, mandates for coverage for things like PTSD for them, essentially these are such vital professions and vital resources for communities. It was important to support them. And I'm really, really excited to say just yesterday, the Ohio Association of Firefighters and the Fraternal Order of Police both endorsed my campaign. And these are not organizations that just necessarily go endorse all the Democrats. It's a real mix of legislators. And so it's meaningful to me to have both of their stamps of approval this campaign. So moving on to the second bucket, it was public education. And now I think I've told a few of you, and the mayor mentioned, I have 2 kids in the public schools, both of whom are adorably picked up off of my driveway every morning. And I've got a 5-year-old kindergartner whose backpack is like 2/3 of her body, and they shuffle onto the school bus. And they voluntarily sat together. Like they got to choose who they would sit with. And my 3rd grader in my kindergarten chose to sit together. I'm like, score, that's fantastic. And anybody who'd be willing to sit with my 5-year-old is just an amazing human being in general. I'm told she's already the boss of the bus. So that's how that goes with Mimi. But we had, and I think you're well aware of this, certainly we have some pillars of our public schools here in the room, historically, unconstitutionally funded our schools. And the basics of it is too much reliance on local funding, too much reliance and dependence on property values and property taxation. So we had this fantastic bipartisan effort between now Speaker Cupp and John Patterson, who was termed out and is not in the legislature now. They spent years crafting the Cupp-Patterson framework to finally, I don't know if fix is really the fully right word, I don't know, but really closely work on or make dramatic improvements to how we're funding schools. And the bottom line for that is more state funding and making it more of a priority for the state to provide a common and base level of funding for our public schools. And that bill was rolled into the budget this GA, and we passed it in a bipartisan vote. So for the first time since, I think it was 1994, the first DeRolf decision, it was early to mid 90s. So we're talking almost 30 years of unconstitutional funding, lack of funding coming from the state for our schools, and we got that fixed this time. So, I think when it comes to our public schools, it's another one of those things that is absolutely foundational to a community. It's a huge reason why Amanda and I chose to locate in Hudson. We knew we wanted to start a family. Everybody said Hudson schools, right? That's where you want to be. And then just, in general, I want to speak to supporting our schools. I think it's important to be a public advocate for our schools. And they have certainly been up against some trying times over the last couple of years. I think have handled it exceptionally and brilliantly. And I have publicly said that. I have gone to the school board meetings and publicly said that. And I think it's important as a community that we say, no, nothing's perfect. We're not asking our schools or our teachers to be 100% perfect, but we support and trust them. And we are going to work together and collaboratively as a community to have their backs. And I think it's an incredibly important thing that we need to say together. So I'm a loud and proud public schools advocate. And I think, I hope they feel that, and I'll continue to be going forward. So, but I will say, we did it in the budget, the school funding, which means it's not permanently written into law, which means we're going to come back down to Columbus next January. I hope I will be there. And we're going to have to continue that Cupp-Patterson framework into the next budget, into the next General Assembly, or ideally craft it into law, make it law, instead of just funding it through the budget. So I hope I am still down there and will continue to be a forceful advocate for the schools. And finally, I want to talk about a really great program that I had an opportunity to work on in the jobs front. I don't think Jim is here this morning, but one thing that I've learned working with Jobs Ohio and Team NEO, and learned a lot from Jim Stifler, is we need land and space in Northeast Ohio to do great economic development. In fact, the Intel project's original location they were targeting was Northeast Ohio, but we did not have enough viable space for it. It's a massive, we all know it's a massive project. So we had the opportunity to help to support the passage of a Brownfield remediation program. So it's the first time that the state has put funding and resources toward Brownfield remediation. I believe the number is $550 million over the biennium that we are providing in grants to local municipalities to rehab land, to clean it up, to take whatever out, whatever is in the ground, and get that land prepared for redevelopment. And it's a fantastic, it's just so many wins here. But ultimately, instead of taking down green space, we are able to redevelop and re-strengthen the core of our cities and municipalities and provide additional space for exceptional demand that's coming in from everything I'm hearing. There's a lot of demand for new space, both warehousing and increasingly manufacturing. And because of federal bills that were passed, there's anticipated to be more demand. So we need space, and we need great economic development partners to bring that investment in. Right, we need folks who want to get to yes on doing an economic development project, and Team NEO are fantastic partners in that. So I've really been pleased to work on that program, and that's incredibly important to me. Do I like 2 more minutes? I don't want to over. Okay, all right. Say I get you all to myself. This is great. This is nice. Final thing I want to talk about is fighting corruption, and I think this is really, again, foundational to a healthy, functioning state. And in the last General Assembly, we passed HB 6, which is this terrible energy policy. We ended up indicting, or we ended up kicking the speaker out. And I just want to talk about that moment because of the corruption that underpinned the passage of HB 6, which, for those of you who don't know, $60+ million of dark money went through these not unaccountable dark money groups. And it turns out a bunch of it was misappropriated, spent on beach houses in Florida, legal fees that it shouldn't have been, to influence and buy votes. It's all under investigation. There was millions of dollars given to Sam Randazzo, who was then appointed the public utilities chair, who then took the exceptional position of supporting HB 6, which had never been done in Ohio history, a public utilities chair supporting a piece of legislation. So that's now the law of the land. And even though we have kicked the guy out, who was one of the guys out who was at the core of that, it is still the law of the land. So we are still bailing out 2 coal plants, one of which were built in 1953, one of which is in Madison, Indiana, which I drove to go check it out. It's an hour over the border. We're not getting the energy back. We're not getting the jobs back. The plant is non-viable in terms of economically, it is dependent on subsidies for it to continue running. And those subsidies are $12,000 an hour that we are still paying to bail those plants out, 2 OVEC plants. And the total, I think, is like $288 million that we're at right now. And if you go to the Ohio Consumer Council's webpage, you will see a tally of where that's at. So I've taken a really strong stand against that bill, trying to repeal the rest of it and trying to lay the groundwork to ensure it doesn't happen again. So 2 things I want to highlight, and then I'll wrap up. One is the my Energy and Jobs Act, which is a new energy policy for Ohio, which gets us on track toward, it retains nuclear, but it also gets us on track to reducing our emissions over time. And it gets us into a situation where we're welcoming more solar development, more wind development, which is currently really essentially all over the Midwest except Ohio right now. And it also has strong reforms for the Public Utilities Commission as well, to ensure that we have consumer advocates and non-industry, essentially industry can't just pluck their people in and put them on the Public Utilities Commission. They would be directly accountable to voters. So I'm hoping to lay the groundwork for a better energy policy going forward. And the final thing is the Public Officials Integrity Act. John Husted just joined a corporate bank board, which I think is kind of shocking to me. We have statewide constitutional officers in Ohio: governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, treasurer, auditor. And these are full-time positions. And in the case of the lieutenant governor, by far the highest paid public official in an elected official in government. I think he's at $177,000 a year. It's a good salary, but he became the first statewide official in Ohio history that we can find that took an additional job as a board member of a bank that does business with the state. And I just think that's a pretty egregious conflict of interest. So I authored a bill with my colleague Mary Lightbody in Columbus that would prevent outside employment for our full-time elected statewide officials. Our legislature is a part-time legislature. It's citizen-led. It's outlined in the state constitution. But I think there's an absolute difference for our statewide officials. I think when you are elected there, you should dedicate yourself full-time to that position. And if you want to be on corporate boards, I think you should go do that and not be, resign your position and go do something in the private sector, especially an organization that does business with the state. And he so far has refused to disclose what he's being paid. So this to me is not a Republican or Democrat issue at all. This is just a simple integrity issue. So that I went on the State of Ohio TV show last week for the first time, a little bit of a rite of passage, and got to talk about that bill. So I'm really happy with the work that I've been able to do. I truly love this job. I love being your representative. I love being out in the community. I love interacting with my constituents or my bosses, as I often say. When I see kids, I'm like, "You're my boss," and their eyes just widen. It's awesome. Like, yes, you are 100% my boss. My job is to represent you, and I hope to continue doing it. I truly love this community. We're so happy to be here, and I'm so thankful to be here in front of you today. I think last thing I'll say is, I think no matter what you think about a group and whether they agree with you or not, I think it's important to show up. And I know not everybody agrees with certainly everything that I do or the positions that I put forward in this room, but I'll always show up. I promise you that, and I'll always listen. So and to that effect, I'm happy to take any questions that you have. I know Mimi's going to have a question for me. Thank you. Thank you. It's okay. Throw it at me.
Yeah, I have to be the first one up because of my namesake, because I wouldn't want to let her down.
Yeah.
In his family, the Mimi is the boss, and she keeps them busy. But I have two questions. One has to do with the school funding, which I think is great. And you said public school funding. And I know that we're in the midst of all this nonsense with trying to divert public school money to the charter for profit schools. How does that funding work out in terms of access for profit charter schools?
It's a great question. So two things. One, in the new budget, which HB1 rolled into, for the first time, we created a separate pot of funding for charter or for students who are in ed choice programs, separate from the public school funding. That was a critical component of HB1, which again was rolled into the budget. That was the first time that we separated those funding streams and did not take funds from the public schools when a child would go into a charter school. What concerns me is that it was a temporary fix, right? And that we have what are called backpack bills and ed choice expansion bills, which open up the window dramatically there's two efforts. One, to essentially allow any child to leave public schools, and the funding will follow them to whatever institution they want. And that includes, now it's going to include religious institutions, which, fundamentally for me, my position on this is public dollars should go to public schools. That's where I stand on the issue. If you would want to and choose to send your child to another school, I think that's fantastic and great. And you should have choice as a parent to do that. But I do not believe that we should be taking public funds and putting them into private institutions. So those two bills, there's two of them right now. One is ed choice expansion. One is the backpack bill. And it just passed in Kentucky. these bills have a way of hanging out in committee for a long time and then very rapidly making their way to the House floor. So I think it's important to kind of be on the alert and on the defensive for those.
The other one was on the energy side. I realize that these are not brownfield sites, but one of the things that is keeping land use out of from the ability to change for alternative development is the thousands of abandoned gas wells that are scattered across, especially Northeast Ohio. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel for the state to actually do the job that the Department of Natural Resources is supposed to do?
Yeah, we got briefed by Mary Mertz, who is the head of ODNR, our committee, on that exact program, orphan and abandoned wells. The state does not provide nearly enough funding to do it, but the infrastructure bill that was passed, bipartisan federal infrastructure bill, provides like a generational investment in that. So when they briefed us, it was like maybe 50 to 60 wells a year, and there are thousands that they were on pace for. There are thousands of these wells all over Ohio, and mapping them is an issue too. But with the federal funding, they're going to be able to ramp up that pace dramatically. I think the goal is to, in the next 10 years, to be able to cap them. And there are better technologies with UAVs to be, or drones to be able to fly over and detect them too.
And my last hit, what are we going to do about having created people like me, second-class citizens, without the right to determine our own future choice with respect to family? Where are we going on that, and what's your perspective?
Well, I think it's
The right to choose, where does
the
Casey
Dobbs
stand
row,
on
the row,
that?
yeah, row repeal. Well, I'm pretty public about where I stand on that issue. I'm pro-choice and don't think that government should be in that decision between a woman and her doctor. It's as simple and foundational as that for me. And I will tell you, since the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, I've had many women, friends, reach out to me to share their stories. They are Republican, Democrat, Christian, Jewish, there is a broad spectrum of people that have had issues in their own lives or with their pregnancies, and that this impacts now. And I think it's important to say that the right to choose abortion is healthcare for a lot of women. It ends up being healthcare. And I just don't think government belongs in that decision. There are so many scenarios and so many complications and so many things that happen during a pregnancy. And I was shocked. I had friends, close friends, who I had no idea had serious complications. And then several of them have asked me to share testimonials. And I encourage you to go look at Jessica Hoffler's, the recent one that we just did. She, shared a very powerful story about her experience through this and how foundational she believes the right to choose, or the right to make that decision for a woman and, her family and her baby, and what she wants to do. So I've been on the record for that. As for the law, the heartbeat bill is currently the law in Ohio. There is a bill right now that's moving for a total abortion ban with no exceptions for rape, incest, or life of the mother. And the Senate president, who is the most powerful person in Ohio government, has said that he's going to move that this fall. So I expect that to be on the floor this December when we're in our lame duck session. I think December 21st is our lame duck session. So we're going to be there late, and I have no doubt that we'll have a total abortion ban bill on the floor. So that's where things stand today. Mr. Field.
Thank you for the support of the public schools. We appreciate that. So I have sort of two questions also. So first, on the issue of water, and it just reminded me a long time ago, a professor on Mideast policy had a really interesting quote. He said that everyone thinks that it's all about oil. He said it's all about water and who has the water in the Mideast and who does not. This was maybe 40 years ago. So it is all about the water, and I think a lot of states are finding that out. So my question is this, and again, this may be under the federal government, but see what the state government could do. So the lake is fed by rivers, and the rivers are fed by streams. And if the streams and the rivers aren't kept clean, then the lake's not kept clean. So my first question is, what can, in my understanding is that right now, those are supposed to be kept clean, but there was various rulings that they don't necessarily have to be kept clean. So I was wondering what the state can do in that. I row on the Cuyahoga River. I wouldn't necessarily jump in and swim around in it, but my understanding is it is way, light years cleaner than it was back in the days when oil slicks caught fire. So that's question one. Question two, actually specifically with charter schools. So one time we had ECOT, electronic classroom of tomorrow, that had 16,000 students enrolled, and for those they got $6,000 each from the surrounding districts, and it turned out about 10,000 students enrolled, they got the money and actually never took classes. And the state was trying to claw back that money. ECOT said, no, the way the rules are written, which I guess they were involved in, we get to keep it, but they ended up losing that. So if you take 10,000 students times $6,000, that's about, did I just write 60 million a year? And I think it was going on for about 10 years. So it's about 600 million they made on students that never attended. And so my question is this, is where's the state in terms of trying to claw that money back? So the two questions are protecting the rivers and streams. The second one on.
I do appreciate the recap on the questions. Okay, question one. We are going from a state perspective in the exact wrong direction on protecting ephemeral streams. So an ephemeral stream, and I know this so well because again, I'm on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and my job is to fight, as the ranking member, fight the bad legislation. And I view this very much as bad legislation. So there was a bill that removed state regulation from ephemeral streams, which are only flow when there is rain or when there is a significant rain event. But, unfortunately, those are the streams most subjected to runoff and pollution because by definition, they exist when there is a significant amount of runoff. So that bill, we fought it in committee, but we don't have a majority. So it passed committee and it passed the Ohio House and has since become state law that we no longer regulate and protect ephemeral streams in Ohio. That said, on the federal side, there was a ruling for the Clean Water, the Clean Water Act, that I think extended, re-extended. You have to check me on this. We have a lawyer, at least one lawyer in the room. There was, I believe those federal protections are back in the works. And that might be subject to a lawsuit as well at the federal level. So we're in flux right now from a protective state for the flow into Lake Erie. And that's really critical because the western basin of Lake Erie is so shallow and there's so much farmland in western Lake Erie that is the source of the majority of the pollution that creates those algal blooms that famously cut off the water supply to Toledo several years ago. So we have work to do on protection. H2 Ohio is a good step in the right direction, but it's voluntary, it's funding. I would like to see strengthened laws and reinstated laws on ephemeral streams and runoff going into that lake. Okay, the second question was ECOT. And okay, I passed the test. I remembered both parts of the question. So I am not 100% sure where the state stands on reclaiming. It was subject to a lot of lawsuits, and I've learned these things take years and years to resolve themselves. Like Larry Householder, for example, who was at the center of HB 6 is not going up for trial until next year, but this all went down in 2019. So it takes a long time for it to work itself out. I know there were, ECOT is no longer a going concern. which is great. So I think we've stopped the bleeding from that perspective. I don't know the status of reclaiming those funds, but I can find out. And I'd actually like to know myself exactly where that stands, and I will. Thanks, James. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So the state plays a really vital role in the handling and dispersing of those funds. So the question was about EVs and chargers. And I mean, I can tell you amongst my friends, a lot of them are now buying plug-in hybrids or EVs. I drive a EV myself, and we have a van that's a plug-in hybrid that goes 40 miles pure electric, and folks are definitely asking about this. So yes, an historic increase in funding is coming, and the state is putting those funds. So the state, through the controlling board, will essentially flow those funds into different projects around the state in partnership with the federal government. We're going to dramatically ramp up the number of charging options around the state over the next 5 or so years. One thing I will say, we have really punitive taxes on EVs and hybrids. They're far above and beyond. It's $200 per year per EV, and everybody wants to pay their fair share. But if you look at an equivalent like Honda Accord or something like that, a fairly fuel efficient sedan, when you're comparing apples to apples, they would pay about $118 every year, in gas tax, but we're charging EV owners $200. When you look at a hybrid that's a plug-in that uses both an internal combustion engine and electric, they would pay, I forget what the exact number is, but it's much less than the $100, they are being charged at the $200 level, even though they use gas and pay gas tax as well. So it's a flaw in the law that plug-in hybrid owners are being charged at the full EV rate. And I think the fees in general are too high. So I have a bill, it's before the Transportation Committee. It's a bipartisan bill to adjust those fees. So if you have a plug-in hybrid, you would be charged at the hybrid rate of $50 a year. And that the EV charge would come down to $120 a year, which is equivalent to a gas engine. I think in general, we should be incentivizing a conversion to EVs and more efficient vehicles rather than punishing folks for them. So definitely going to see a ramp up in charging stations. Have I lost anybody? Is anybody asleep? All right, I got you. I can dance. Yep. And what's the learned in the state. So I can repeat it too, just, yeah.
Just read an article about legalization of cannabis and just trying to get feedback from the states.
Yep.
And it's nonetheless confusing. The kind of, other than the taxation gains that they gain, where are we in Ohio with this, and where do you think it's going? Where do you stand?
Yep. So I think I came to this group in 2016. I can't remember if it was my council run or my first state rep run. And I got a question about legal medical marijuana, which was before council. I can't remember if we vote. I think we voted on that, and I was the lone yes vote. So I know I'm at odds with maybe some in the room here on this, but I've been a pretty strong advocate for legalization of cannabis. So I came to I came to this issue. I grew up in New Mexico, and my mom suffers from multiple sclerosis, and it's kind of a defining part of my youth when she got diagnosed and our lives kind of changed. And they legalized medical marijuana when I was in high school in New Mexico, and she has benefited greatly from that. So that's how I kind of came to the issue. Since then, there's definitely been a sea change nationally and now regionally in expansion. First of all, legalization of medical, expansion of medical, and now full legalization. So In Pennsylvania, they have a very mature medical program that they expanded significantly this year to allow essentially any Pennsylvanian to take part in the medical program. In Michigan, they went forward with full legalization, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. And then if you look at states, Louisiana just legalized or decriminalized. If you look at states, Illinois decriminalized. So they're taking significant steps. In Ohio, we took the step of legalizing a relatively small medical program. Now today, that program is being expanded administratively through the confines of that law, which is increasing grow sites and increasing dispensaries. And in Hudson, we have several families who are involved in the industry. I am an advocate for it, and I put a bill forward, the first bill to legalize. I think that we have reached a tipping point in terms of states in our surrounding states that have moved forward and done this. I think it is a criminal justice issue. We arrest 21,000 Ohioans every year. And remember, I got endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police, despite putting this bill forward. We arrest 21,000 Ohioans every year for nonviolent, low-level marijuana possession and throw them in jail. I think that is a mistake and a misuse of resources. I also look at the significant expansion of our medical program, which is trending this way. And I also look at states like Michigan, which is current, and Colorado and Washington State, which are currently generating between $30 million and $110 million every month in revenue from the excise tax that is going, according to my bill and their bills as well, are going right back into communities that host dispensaries. There's still a local opt-out where communities can say, we don't want this in our community, which I think, again, wearing my council hat is important for home rule. But I think it is time for our state to move forward. So today we have an expanding medical program with additional access to more grow sites and more production and more dispensaries, retail locations are rolling out. And then going forward, my bill is had bipartisan support, and there is a Republican bill that almost matches mine word for word. So there is a growing coalition of lawmakers who support this, but not enough to pass it right now, frankly. So we're going to be in this medical marijuana state for a while. There is a ballot initiative that's in the works. I think if this goes to voters, I saw polling that it was 76-24, that the group that was putting the ballot initiative forward to pass it. I think if it is a well-structured ballot initiative that provides equitable access into the program and protects communities that don't want this in their community, I think it will pass overwhelmingly. And I think you will see that in the next 4 years that Ohio will fully legalize. I hope that answers your question. It's still kind of confusing about exactly where we are today. The long walk.
The long intimidating walk to see Casey. Casey, Rich
yeah.
Warfield, sir, how are you?
I'm wonderful.
Good, thank you for coming. Just a quick question, I just wanted in the background. These are great questions. Because some people in this room know that I'm a tax guy, I'm just curious, where does the state of Ohio rank in the country as far as being tax friendly to its taxpayers? I don't know if you have that feedback, but I do know with a lot of things that have changed to make Ohio more tax friendly, i.e. reducing the tax rate down to 3.99 being the highest rate, and KSIC extending what we call the small business deduction for S corps and flow through entities. It's become really a much better state to operate in. Can you comment on that?
I actually just filled out the endorsement application for the Ohio Society of CPAs. So yes, I can comment on this. So for 2 successive operating budgets, which again passed with bipartisan votes, which I'd love to see, because the operating budget, $80 billion, that is like 90% of the policy that we put forward as a legislature is where the money's going to go. We've passed tax cuts. And so you're right, we are down to a top bracket of 3.99. And we also have done a lot of tax alleviation at lower brackets, which benefits lower income Ohioans, which I really like to see. Folks who make a lot more can afford to pay a little bit more. Regionally, I believe Ohio is now, most of our peer states are around 5. We are now below 4. So from an income tax perspective, I think we're really competitive. We're always looking at additional taxes, severance taxes, for example, on oil and gas. we have a very competitive severance tax. I would actually like to be honest, I'd like to see it a little bit higher because that revenue goes right back into the communities that have the oil and gas infrastructure. And my wife did a study at Ohio State that said that they are too low, and we are not providing enough revenue back into the communities that are essentially hosting these oil and gas locations and pipelines. So I'd like to see that a little bit higher, but another perspective could be we have an extremely competitive tax rate for that. So I think it's fair to say that we have created a pretty friendly regulatory environment and tax environment. And as a result, we're seeing big projects and big economic development projects come into Ohio and into my district. And, Intel was a huge win for everybody. It was a bipartisan win. I think from taking one step back and looking at what we're doing from a policy for fair treatment for all Ohioans, we could do a lot better. One thing is we are one of, I think, 3 states left in America that does not protect LGBT Ohioans from being fired or losing their house. It's called the Fairness Act. It is a bipartisan bill that is joint sponsored by a Republican and a Democrat. I was the joint sponsor last GA. This GA, I am a co-sponsor. The chamber businesses are behind this, but we can't seem to get this over the hump to become the 48th state, I believe, to protect people's employment and housing because of their sexual orientation. So, I think from that perspective, and I know Intel has been very active about communicating how important that is to them in the biggest economic development project in Ohio history. So just taking one step back, I want to do more work on that side. But I think it's fair to say, that we've done a good job on tax revenue. The last point I'll make on that is there is a tipping point where I don't want to see state revenues collapse because they're so vital for so many programs at the county and city level. So I hope we're not going to cut our taxes into oblivion because we still need revenue for a state to create a strong state. Thank you for the question. Okay, yeah, thank you.
So much for coming. Thank you. So I have a little task for you before you run away. Hold on, we have 2. 599-567. 567. Casey coming today. 2 things that I have appreciated about him for years. Yeah, 2 things that I've really appreciated about Casey for years. And the first time was when you came. I had never met you before. When you came to Rotary, we were at Laurel Lake, and you answered the marijuana question in the same way you answered it today. And I thought, this is a tough group to answer that question so candidly. But there's never been a question that I've seen posed to him that he didn't answer honestly and straightforward. No skirting around and no rubbing off the edges. So super, really appreciate that about you. We've disagreed like on 1 or 2 times and had candid disagreements, and it's been wonderful. He's been so good and gracious. And the other thing is his family, a beautiful family he has. My youngest son was a student of Amanda's at Akron. He just graduated and got a really good job. So we were so thrilled about that. But yeah, and the way that you support your family and are, that means a lot to me, and I think a lot to the people. So thank you so much for coming. We got time for maybe just a quick story, okay? Okay, yeah. So this is about this fellow. His name was James Hayes. He was a night security guard in California, made minimum wage, and then one day won $19 million in the California Super Lotto. Well, as you know, what happened, the first thing was the IRS showed up and they wanted their part of it and they just took it right out of there. And then his not yet ex-wife showed up and she wanted her part out of it. And so even after all those hands went through it, James walked out with this tidy sum of several $1 million. And so he didn't have, or he didn't listen to good financial advice. So he went off on a spending spree, bought himself all kinds of stuff, bought his friends and his family and everybody he could possibly meet, all sorts of stuff. And then he discovered heroin. And he started spending $1,000 a week on heroin. And a few, months, whatever, he had no job. He was broke and he was nursing a severe drug addiction. So in order to take care of this unholy trifecta of circumstances, he took to robbing banks. And so he started robbing banks in California. And the FBI nicknamed him the PT Cruiser Bandit because of the car that he drove. And people in the neighborhood started naming him the Seasoned Bandit, apparently because of the color of his hair, which I think is defamatory and totally unfair. Anyway, so he's out robbing banks, the FBI is on a trail, and eventually they do catch up to him. And he pleads guilty to bank robbery and spends 33 months in a federal penitentiary. And it got me thinking about the irony of having the opportunity for financial freedom and turning that into a literal jail cell. And how freedom, properly used, is wonderful and a great blessing. But freedom, when it's exploited, becomes a prison. So there's your thought for the day. Go out and be great, make a difference in somebody's life, and serve, put service above self.